All right, so we have interesting news in China and kind of spreading all around the world as the Olympics roll towards starting in Beijing. But this is about Elon Musk and China. So this relationship has been very profitable for both sides for a very long time, but eventually things are going to come to a head. So let's talk about it. Recently, a Global Times article came out and it basically criticized Elon Musk for what's going on in space. So recently there was supposed problems where recent Starlink satellites had almost hit the new Chinese space station. And there were protests filed with the UN, but China files these sorts of things all the time, and they're often fake, bogus, whatever you want to call it. So that's a whole thing. But more about what's going on is the reaction in China. So this Global Times article is commenting on that issue with these satellites and how it's harming or potentially harming or threatening to the Chinese space program, and particularly to the new Chinese space station, which is a big deal in China. So here's a quote from this article. Quote, Chinese analysts also warned that Musk's company needs to handle the case seriously, as the Chinese public has expressed anger on the matter on social media platforms, and Chinese consumers might decide to boycott Musk's businesses in China's market, such as the Tesla vehicles, end quote. So this is actually a really common thing that happens, but this is the Global Times, nationalist tabloid, talking about how if some foreign person doesn't do something right, who knows, the Chinese people might gather up and pitchforks and start protesting or getting violent or rejecting their products or rejecting their goods. This is a really, really common strategy. And it's also not, again, wrong, because social media mobs did already form, kind of calling Elon reckless and out of control, and SpaceX having crazy problems and not doing things right and not considering China. All this kind of stuff is pretty common. And there's a whole separate issue about the SpaceX Starlink system and what that means for a lot of countries and for astronomy and for other factors. But this is not just about SpaceX, right? This is about Tesla too. And it's not just China getting mad at these satellites, which is a deeper competitive thing we'll get into in a minute. There's also just Tesla. These consumers that China was pointing out, it wasn't that they were going to stop using SpaceX satellites or rockets, because neither of those are going to be available in China in the first place. It's about Tesla. And Tesla is really the core of Elon Musk's problem with China, and SpaceX is really at the core of China's problem with Elon Musk. So this isn't just about these satellites. It's not just about this. It's a much deeper thing. And SpaceX is actually kind of rare that SpaceX will get hit with problems online, because it doesn't have that consumer presence in China. It doesn't offer any products there. But Tesla, this has happened a lot. So there's a big reaction online to a braking issue, problem with the brakes, at least in the Tesla cars, somewhere towards the end of 2020. And there's been other issues over the years. And there's been big sort of grandstanding by different people and people making big notices. And basically, it's been something that Tesla's had to deal with constantly over the years. And in general, the success of both companies, both of Elon Musk's companies, SpaceX and Tesla, provoke very ambivalent reactions in China. On the one hand, there's admiration for the trailblazing technological success and financial success of these companies. But on the other hand, there's consternation, because these aren't Chinese companies. They're world-beating. China wants access to this, many things they can do. It doesn't want to be knocked out from the innovations that it's creating, but also it has no control over it. And what this means is that Elon Musk has been playing a very, very tricky and dangerous game, trying to balance between the US and China. There's like a lot of other companies that I've talked about. And at Tesla, he is always effusive to the Chinese Communist Party and to China in general. He apologizes, or his officers apologize to the Chinese population whenever errors occur, like with its braking system or other parts of the car or any other issues. And in general, Elon Musk gushes about the quality of the workforce, how effectively people build things and get things done and execute in China. In general, he really admires how well the Chinese have executed on their goals to modernize and do everything they've done in the last few decades. And in part, he was rewarded for all of this, for this, this nice language, with the first fully owned car factory in China prior to Tesla's factory near Shanghai. Every single auto facility in China was part of a joint venture. This was part of a way to get technological transfer and to make sure that China wasn't just being used as a production type, but being used in a way where China could also eventually move up the value chain, make its own great cars, and do things of that sort. And this new factory was also in part not just because China was giving something to Elon, throwing him a bone for being nice. It was also because China is doing the same thing. It's not trying to get technological transfer and other things by owning a piece of the factory. It wants to use it by making sure it's there in the first place, because it wants to use Tesla, or wanted to use Tesla, and is using Tesla to galvanize its Chinese competitors and to make them more successful, to make the supply chain in China part of Tesla's supply chain, so it can use many of the various innovations and the various parts and components that are part of the cost innovations, the electrical, the computing improvements that Tesla's made, and it wants this to spread throughout its auto sector. So from China's perspective, at this point, having a joint venture with someone like Volkswagen, that's good. I mean, that's useful, but just making sure that that Tesla was in China was actually enough, right? And there's so much industrial espionage going on to make sure that they know everything that's going on with that company. It doesn't really matter at this point whether you have some random Chinese state or local company that is a state or provincial sort of government-owned company that is having a piece of the action. That's not really that important anymore. But now we have a problem where this stuff doesn't fly in the United States. Elon Musk going around complimenting China, talking about how impressive it is, talking about all this stuff, which you will hear me do a similar thing for various parts of China and Chinese civilization, because there's important things to understand about why it is good at some things, why it is terrible at others, why it is heinous in some ways, but somehow impressive in others. And there's something very deep to the admiration many people feel for what China's done that I'll talk about in some other video. But this, in general, complimenting China in the current situation and with what's going on in China, across China, and with its relations with other countries, isn't a good thing. So, for example, this month, in January 2021, Tesla opened up a showroom in Xinjiang, and it immediately got hit in the West for supporting a genocidal government, right? That is what happens when you do business or have a presence in Xinjiang. This is now in a supply chain on the production side, in the sort of upstream supply chain. This is now illegal in the United States to have if Tesla was getting components from Xinjiang, it would be in violation of U.S. law. So that's a whole thing. But what it's doing instead is also pushing a consumer presence to have a showroom in Xinjiang. And even that is not acceptable, because it's, whether you want to talk about how the development has happened in Xinjiang and the way it's going to go and whatever, that's really relevant. Now, basically, while Hong Kong and Taiwan have fallen to the background for the moment, the Olympics are crystallizing opposition to China in Xinjiang and around the Uyghur issue. So this is just not something you can really be doing in the West anymore, and it's hitting businesses from the NBA to Apple to Nike to Volkswagen to anyone. There's no way to square this circle with the Uyghur and problem and the Xinjiang issue in China. The West in particular has such a strong backlash to the Holocaust in Germany in World War II, the 1940s. This is very prominent in the Western imagination, and also particularly in the United States internal imagery, because the last time the United States really felt it was the great good guy doing something noble and impressive in the world was when it fought Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany in the 1940s during World War II. This is the idealized good old days that, the boomer generation in particular looks back on. So to suddenly feel like, the United States was willing to go to war with Germany, it turned out it managed to stop this horrible genocide going on. Meanwhile, the U.S. is continuing to just do business with China as what's going on in Xinjiang happens. This doesn't sit well with people. And China can try and say what it wants about how this isn't a genocide, this isn't that. This is legal wrangling. And it doesn't look good, particularly for companies in the West. And Tesla, again, this is a vice, right? If Tesla backs out of Xinjiang to appease the West, he pisses off China, right? That's what happens. And if he doesn't back out of Xinjiang, it makes Tesla look like a stooge that is complicit with genocide. And of course, that doesn't really mean that. I mean, so many companies are in China and they're trying to pretend like they're not, or this, that. You can't really avoid China. But nonetheless, this is what the politics are pushing people towards. And, as in every other sector, these issues are not going to get better. They're not going to get better, which people keep missing. This is the last 5 years. They've just gotten worse. And there's almost zero chance that they could get better with what's coming this decade. So that's just the background. And this is the Tesla side of things. This is this vice that I've been talking about for a while that companies are being pulled into. And particularly, we'll get into in a minute, how this is really important for extremely well-known celebrity type people like Elon Musk. That is a problem to be a celebrity in China right now. But in general, there's the other company. There is SpaceX, which is a totally different and separate issue in China. And the main thing that's going on here is that SpaceX is a massive competitive threat to China. And here, Elon Musk often compliments China on getting rockets to orbit and other accomplishments in its space sector. But here, it just falls flat. And the truth is, it can almost seem patronizing to China when the Starship system that SpaceX is developing is basically 2 generations ahead of Chinese rockets in terms of technology. Basically, SpaceX is simply outclassing the Chinese space program, right? And it's doing this, it's showing up and it's stunting on China. And this is the same thing it's doing in a lot of ways to NASA and to old American space contractors like Northrop Grumman and Boeing and the United Launch Alliance and all of that, which has been, a minor story in this world and sort of the space technology world for at least the last decade. But things are very different in China because in China, space is connected to pride and to a sense of Chinese ascendance into the world, into the heavens, and it's really connected to political legitimacy. The Chinese Communist Party feels like space is the final frontier, that it's a place where great nations and civilizations play and compete. It's a grand arena. And that is the way it treats it, right? That's why it's spending so much money on a space program, in addition to its military. And it hurts a lot for the government to see Elon Musk doing everything he's doing, right? So what's going on with the Starlink satellite is that this is a massive system of over thousands and thousands of satellites. It depends. I mean, it could go up to 40,000, depending on how many shells and stuff are built out of all these satellites. And there's been nothing like this ever in history. SpaceX is the largest satellite operator in the world. It's larger than any other country at this point. It's also the largest satellite manufacturer. So we're seeing a transformation of the industrial base in this sector. And the reason why this is happening is because, the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is altering the cost equation for launching satellites into orbit. It's making them cheaper. It has reusable rockets. And this is allowing the massive super capital intensive and endless launch cadence of these Starlink satellites. And there's so many issues connected to Starlink and to SpaceX and to space. But what this is also doing is it's basically undermining the basic idea of national space program. So in China, they are copying basically everything SpaceX is doing, right? They want to have reusable rockets. They want to have their own space satellite network like Starlink, a sort of low Earth orbit internet satellite constellation. But these are all basically going to be state assets, right? The Chinese commercial space sector is really not a commercial enterprise. It's a way to inject new energy into a state sector, and these companies will become state companies or partially state companies. They're not going to be their own private entities like SpaceX. And just like around the rest of the entire world, there are really no other commercial space companies that are anywhere of the scale. So what's going on is that with Tesla, China can get a piece of the action. It can bring Tesla into the country and use it to galvanize and improve all of its car companies into the new field of electric vehicles, where China's trying to leapfrog over the West and its old auto supply chains. So, and old products, right? Where a lot of companies are retooling factories and doing stuff like that to make electric vehicles. China thinks it can move ahead and close a lot of the gap that has opened up because China didn't have quite the same auto manufacturing industrial base. So that is what's going on with Tesla. But with SpaceX, China has no access to these technologies. What it has to do is try and copy them from afar. But this is extremely hard to do because the development times for space technologies are extremely long. These are decade-long programs that you can't copy things at the rate that you need to keep up. This isn't like consumer electronics or other areas. This is a very different sort of field. And unfortunately, SpaceX innovates so rapidly and changes everything from the structures, the tanks, the engines. It's improving things at such a rate, and it's also changing the design, particularly of the Starship rocket in the last 5 years multiple times, that you can't really keep up. And there's no patents. There's nothing to steal. You just have to, I mean, obviously there can be industrial espionage to get all the plans, but they're changing so rapidly. And you need things. You need certain key technologies like the particular engine used to even be able to copy it. So you really have to develop your own. So that's what's going on there. And it's very, very tough for the Chinese government, which has just gotten into its stride with space technology. Before 2010, China was launching less than 10 rockets a year. By 2021, by last year, it was launching over 50 a year. This is new. China hasn't been around in the space game nearly as long as the United States or formerly the Soviet Union and what remains of Russia in this sphere. It's a very new thing, and it's really connected with pride. China is building its first space station. It's building its first moon landers and wants to do a base, wants to do all sorts of things. But Elon Musk is just totally outclassing all of this, right? And it is... And NASA is also doing its own things that are really pushing the United States space sector far ahead of the Chinese one. And all of this is bad, right? This is, like I said, connected to political legitimacy in China. And it's very tough for the Chinese government to accept all of this. So Elon Musk is playing a dangerous game. It's a very, very tricky game, but Elon really can't keep up this balancing act forever. The tensions involved here are just too severe. And realistically, once Elon has served his use, he will probably be tossed aside. And most likely this will happen when the electric car market hits its stride. And when there are companies across the world pumping out electric car models comparable to Tesla, and Tesla's market share is declining, it's really served its function to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles, at least in the sort of personal cars and SUVs and truck space. And maybe, I don't know, maybe moves on to go make planes or boats or other things that need to be electrified, and it kind of evolves in a different way. But at that point, there's way less utility in Tesla being there. Once the Tesla factory and all of its innovations have diffused throughout the Chinese auto sector, and once the Chinese people, because there's already strong indication that Tesla is going to be booted out of the Chinese consumer car market probably towards the end of this decade. Once you have that, once you have the production side locked in, the Chinese tech sector and auto sector can do its thing. Chinese consumers are buying Chinese electric cars. It's probably time to ditch Elon Musk. And this may also happen sooner rather than later because Chinese politics are getting very dicey and crackdowns are happening everywhere. Elon is a tech celebrity, and he's more admired in China than really all of the Chinese celebrities that Beijing has already cracked down on. Because of their notoriety and their popularity and their sense, in Beijing, there's a conflict between the power of social media type celebrities and people who have a strong presence in the public eye and imagination compared to the central authorities, right? This is in the US context, this is the problem with someone like a Donald Trump or someone who is, or an Arnold Schwarzenegger from coming in and using a platform and a presence and an audience and a following they've built up outside of politics to muscle into politics in various ways. This is a separate thing in the US where this happens all the time. It's not that big a deal. People don't care, although it's increasingly worrying to people about the competence or this or that of the US government and society and democracy and all that. And that's all things people can worry about. But in China, it's very different. This kind of stuff cannot be allowed to happen because there is only supposed to be one central authority in China, the central government, and that is the Communist Party. And that is it. And everyone else gets basically cut off at the knees. And that includes foreign celebrities as well, eventually. So get ready, because at some point, Beijing is going to put the squeeze on Elon Musk, right? This is going to happen, and it might be because Beijing tries to trap him between the US and China, presenting him with a knot he can't untangle, right? And that's not very hard to do. And the other thing is, Elon might just unknowingly barrel into something that expands far beyond what he expected, because that's the way things are going now. These knots are forming naturally, so it doesn't take very much. And at that point, it might be time to start characterizing Elon as an impertinent American who has gone too far. As someone who has disrespected the Chinese nation, even after it extended its hand to him. It's very likely. And once that comes out in Chinese media, it's disseminated throughout the social media sphere, and that becomes the line, and people buy it. So either way, in China, the Elon Musk show can't go on forever. And we're seeing now the real first inklings of things. When you see on the space side, problems with the Starlink satellite system and what it's doing to Chinese ambitions and technologies and facilities in space, that's one side. Then you have the Tesla problem, which is obviously the issues it creates, both with the cars, and then on the consumer side in Xinjiang, and on the production side as it kind of fades away in its usefulness. This is where the sort of end of the Elon Musk story in China starts. So stay tuned, because something's definitely going to happen at some point. But it's good to know so you can be prepared for it, because there are certain trends. I'll let you know if trends or things are really changing, but things are going in the wrong direction. If someone like Elon Musk or anyone else doing business in China is trying to stay there and try to navigate these tides, it's a tough, tough environment. So if you want to hear more about China, the US, and the world, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. And if you enjoyed this video, like it so more people can see it. And as always, comment or message me if you have any questions. And with that,